18, and she's been working in the environmental field since 1994. She is a surface hydrologist and has worked for many years on the successful cleanup of the Charles River in Greater Boston. She has extensive experience in climate change adaptation, public outreach, and science communication. She recently moved to the North Shore and has high hopes for her new yard, which the writing of this bio was featuring patchy grass and yews. So maybe she'll tell us a little more about that. Today, Kate's topic will be the Greenbelt. She'll introduce the Greenbelt's mission and history in the North Shore and highlight several Cape Ann conservation successes. She'll discuss the importance of land conservation for public health, water supply, ecosystem function, and end with a brief discussion of how the Greenbelt adapted during the pandemic and what lessons the organization has learned. Welcome, Kate. We're very happy to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for the nice introduction, as well as the compliment from your sister. Wow. I hope I live up to how I look, I guess.
Okay, well, hang on. Yeah. I think I'm gonna mute everybody, and then you're gonna have to unmute yourself. Does that work?
That's fine.
Okay, done. Hang on.
All right, I hope you can hear me now. I think I just unmuted myself, so great. Well, it really is fun to have been invited to speak with you today, and I wish that we were meeting in person, not on Zoom, but there are some conveniences to Zoom, and hopefully we'll have a nice meeting, and maybe next time I'll be able to meet with you in person, which would be a lot more fun. And by the way, your Flower Buds program sounds really fantastic. I'm so delighted to hear about that. I hope it goes really well and you're able to lighten the day of lots and lots of people through the season. That's terrific. So as you heard, my name is Kate Bowditch. I grew up in the Boston area and just came here to take over as president of Greenbelt about 2.5 years ago. I am a surface water hydrologist by training, worked on cleaning up the Charles River for most of my career, but I finally crawled out of the water and up onto the land, and here I am now at Greenbelt, and really love being here. I didn't have a lot of experience with the North Shore growing up. I mostly came up to go to the beach and have a couple fried clams and get a sunburn and go home. I didn't really know very much about the other wonderful riches of this region, and so a great amount of happiness and satisfaction in my job coming up here has just come from moving to Beverly and getting to know this area a little bit better, and I still have a lot to learn. I also have a lot to learn about Greenbelt. This is Greenbelt's 60th year, if you don't know. We've been conserving land for quite a long time, and the storied history of this organization is really interwoven and very strongly connected to a lot of what makes this region so special. There's a tremendous amount of protected open land here, and it's a huge benefit not only to the environment, but to all of us who live and work and play in this region. So I feel like I'm just a beginner here at Greenbelt, but I'll do my best to kind of cover a bit of some of our, the type of work that we do and some of the special properties that we've protected fairly recently in the Cape Ann region, and try to leave enough time at the end for questions. So certainly feel free to jump in, and if you are having any difficulties hearing me or anything, I hope maybe there'll be a way for somebody to just jump in and interrupt and let me know. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some slides. And again, hopefully that will work and we won't have any technical challenges. All right, so I hope you're all seeing the screen now. And it should be the opening sort of Greenbelt, Essex County's Land Trust intro screen with a what I think is a beautiful photograph from the top of our Donovan Reservation in Hamilton, Sagamore, excuse me, the Donovan Reservation and Sagamore Hill Conservation Area. As I said, this is our 60th anniversary. Since our founding in 1961, we have protected over 18,200 acres of land, which is really a staggering amount, I think, of land to have protected for this region. And that land is, of course, protected forever. The land that Greenbelt conserves is protected for nature as well as for people. And we have a few different priorities in our mission. One of them is to protect farms and farmland. And this region in particular is really suffering the loss of farms and farmland. The value of property in this region for housing development is so high that it's extremely hard for farmers to keep their property active in agriculture. So one of the things that Greenbelt has recently, I'm just gonna, I don't know if, all right, is that better? One of the things that Greenbelt has recently started doing over the last 5 to 10 years is not only working on conserving farmland, but also working on making farmland affordable for future farmers. We have a couple of different models that we use or different tools and techniques that we use, but overall, in general, the goal is to remove the development rights for non-farming purposes from a piece of land. So if you have a 20-acre farm, it might be worth, quite a huge amount of money if it could be developed into housing. But if through some kind of a restriction, an easement, or even ownership by Greenbelt, that development right is extinguished, the value of the property comes down, and then it becomes affordable again for a future farmer. And many of these tools that Greenbelt has used mean that that affordability is permanent. It's a permanent deed restriction and or again, an easement or a conservation restriction that goes with the property. And so it will remain a farm and farmland in active agricultural use permanently moving forward. So this is really an exciting, I think, development for Greenbelt's work. And the idea that we can continue in Essex County to have farms, active farms producing local food for local people is something I think that I'm tremendously proud of and hope that all of you are excited about. Of course, like all land trusts, Greenbelt protects land for its natural resource value, protecting our clean air and water. And the water issue is particularly important in this region. Drinking water supplies in this area are often surface water or groundwater wells, and keeping land healthy and open in order to protect those water resources is tremendously important. We also, like, as would be no surprise to you, spend a fair amount of our work thinking about habitats and how to protect native flora and fauna. We have a very popular osprey program, which I hope many of you are familiar with. There's a live osprey cam hosted on Greenbelt's website, which is the camera itself is on the marsh right near Lobsterland Restaurant in Gloucester. And imagine all of you know right where that is. And if you're driving by there, you can look out across the marsh and actually see the nest up there on its platform. And the camera is on that nest. And it's an incredibly wonderful thing to be able, especially during the pandemic last year, to be able to log on to the website and see those osprey in their, nesting and hatching their eggs and so on. So I'll show a little video of that if I can get the technology to work a little bit later. But thinking about habitat protection is, of course, one of Greenbelt's core mission focuses. More recently, in the last decade or so, Greenbelt has also begun to really focus on climate change and how our work as a land conservation organization can help protect the future of this region as the climate changes. That may mean thinking about flora and fauna and the habitat that they will be losing, or the work that we might be able to do to protect them moving forward. But it also really means a lot of focus on people. Conserving open land is actually one of the most affordable ways that we can make our future more climate resilient. Having natural open land that can absorb floodwater, that can absorb the impacts of coastal storms and sea level rise, land that can cool urban areas, land that can continue to provide drinking water for us as droughts get longer. All of this is tremendously important, and it has been a major focus of Greenbelt in our land conservation work. In fact, our land conservation prioritization includes several key elements of climate change now. So when we look at land and whether it is a critical priority for conservation, a particular region or even a parcel, we can evaluate it through this lens of how important is this land going to be to preserve the various functions that we'll need as the climate changes into the future. And of course, one thing that I really love about Greenbelt that is not true of all land trusts, but certainly is true of Greenbelt, is that the organization really focuses on people as well as nature. I think Greenbelt understands very, very well that if people don't understand nature, if they don't have a chance to go out and experience natural environments, if they don't feel that these resources are providing them the health benefits and the recreational benefits that they need, they won't be as invested in conservation in the future. And Greenbelt does a terrific job at putting together programs for people to help them get outside and learn about nature, creating beautiful trails with lots of clear signs, online and paper maps that are available so people don't get lost, as well as apps that are available on your phone to access. So it's really been an area that I think is one of Greenbelt's real strengths, and something that I'm delighted, and it helps us tremendously with, of course, our fundraising, which is an important piece of everything we do, but also in building the conservation advocates of the future. Last year, we had to modify our events, just like everybody else, quite a lot, but we still managed to do a lot of community engagement and outreach and host lots of events, even though we did quite a few of them in a do-it-yourself format or a remote format. Normally, we have in-person trail runs and an in-person bike event called Tour de Greenbelt. Last year, all of those were virtual, and yet people seem to have a lot of fun. Posting on social media their photographs of themselves doing these various events. We had people actually running or bike riding in other parts of the country, even somebody from Canada sending in their event as part of one of our events. So we're really looking forward to getting back to being able to host some of these events in person. And I do think in the coming year, we will be able to. We certainly are hoping very much to be able to have Tour de Greenbelt in person this year. As you probably can imagine, we are now sort of emerging from everything being virtual, and now we're having some what we call hybrid events and even some in-person events coming up. But if you are interested in learning a little bit more, we have now, because of last year, we have a huge library of videos, some of them very short, a few minutes long, some of them half an hour or up to an hour, educational videos, videos that demonstrate walks on some of our properties, all different kinds of interesting videos that you can log on to and watch if you're interested directly from our website. And Art in the Barn is ongoing actually right now. If you're familiar with Greenbelt, you may probably know about Art in the Barn. It's really our signature public event, normally held at this time of year every year as an in-person event. Last year and again this year, we had to do it as an online show and sale, although we do have some sculptures here. We have an online sculpture garden, an in-person sculpture garden here at Cox Reservation in Essex, our headquarters. And there's a really neat, I guess you'd say, crowdsourced art project going on in our barn right now at Art in the Barn. So it's a thing you can come into the barn on your own time and create something on a little card that's like a leaf, and then you hang it up on a tree. And we're creating a sort of community art project as part of Art in the Barn that way this year. I'd also like to remind people or mention, if you don't know, that on the 29th of June, we'll be having a climate resilience in-person walk. So if you're interested in coming with Dave Rimmer and Kathy Lanoy to take a look at Cox Reservation and the kinds of planning that we're undertaking to deal with the particularly sea level rise here at our headquarters, do sign up for that as space is limited. But it's really exciting to be able to be doing some in-person events again. And of course, our stewardship program has remained very robust throughout the year in spite of COVID. Greenbelt spends a huge amount of our time and energy on stewardship. We basically think of our work as having sort of three legs of the stool: land conservation, community engagement, and stewardship. And all three of those pieces are really critical to our mission. One thing you can see here on the left side of the slide is a screen capture from the app that we created, the application that we created for our stewardship team. So they go out in the field when they're doing conservation restriction monitoring. So they monitor properties where Greenbelt holds a conservation restriction to make sure that there aren't any violations happening, and also to check in with owners. And they now have this online app that they can just use on their tablet or their phone as they're going around and doing their monitoring. So really a nice example of one of the ways that Greenbelt is able to use technology to improve and make our work a little bit more efficient. I did want to mention our species conservation program, and in particular the osprey program. Given that you're in Rockport, you probably also know about the piping plover conservation program, and Greenbelt does work to support that in several communities. It's a lot of fun. But the osprey program is really what everyone is probably most familiar with, and is a beloved program. So I'm going to try and show this video. It's just a couple minutes long, and hopefully it will run and you'll hear the sound. If it isn't working well, or you're not hearing the sound, Holly or Leslie, if one of you could unmute yourselves and let me know, I can just stop the video and continue the slideshow.
Kate, are we supposed to be hearing something?
Yes, there should be
Okay,
some music.
Okay, hang on. Why don't you stop the video, and we aren't hearing anything. I'm
Okay,
not. Anyway.
Sorry about that.
I don't know how to
I think it's
happen.
probably on my end.
Yeah, it's probably on your end.
And I'm sorry. I can.
The images are gorgeous.
Well, we can keep, if people are interested, it's not very long. We can go without the music. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, the images.
I practiced this the other day and it worked well. But I've had this trouble once before, which is why I was a little uncertain.
Let's go without the music.
Okay, here we go.
What is that? What is that bird?
That's an osprey.
Oh, gorgeous. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I missed it, and I'm sorry I missed it. I'll shut up now.
So this is Annie and Squam. They're the two osprey, male and female. And they're their little babies that they hatched last summer. All last summer, we had so many people logging on to watch these guys. It was really amazing. This is the male squam. And you can see, hopefully, over here on the right side of the nest, they're so well camouflaged, those little young birds. So you can see how quickly they grow, just 43 days, and they already look like real birds. It's getting a little crowded there in the nest. It's really getting towards the end of the summer here. You can see now there's just 2 birds left. One has fledged. And now just the last one. Squam, the father, stays around till the very end of the season to make sure that the last of his chicks remains fed. Well, I'm really sorry that it didn't work to hear the music because it's a lovely little soundtrack that goes with that. But hopefully you got to at least enjoy watching the video and the pictures. And I can tell you, I hope, by the way, that you're seeing my slideshow again.
We're
We
fine.
had, great.
Fine.
We had over 60,000 viewers of that video, or sorry, of the cam, the live Osprey cam last year. And this year in 2021, it's been extremely popular again. So I encourage you to head over to Greenbelt's website if you're interested in Osprey and learning a little bit more about them. There's all kinds of information there. I do want to spend the last few minutes talking about our conservation work. And this is a map of Essex County. Of course, we are a land trust, so land conservation is one of our main interests and our main mission focuses. You can see 2 colors of green on the map here. The darker green parcels are parcels that Greenbelt has protected, and the lighter green parcels are protected land that have been protected by others, either municipalities or the state or other nonprofits, other land trusts. But it's really an exciting map to see how much of our county is protected and preserved forever. I zoomed in here just to show you the Cape Ann region specifically to give you a sense of how much of the land in this region is conserved and how special that is. Obviously, you can see the whole middle of the Rockport and Gloucester Cape Ann area, Dogtown, which you probably all are familiar with and expect would show up on a map like this. But there's really quite a bit of other conserved land. It's really remarkable. We're so lucky to live in a place that has so much natural, healthy land around us. And a lot of it has trails and is open and accessible for us to go visit. The red dots that you see here are properties that Greenbelt has protected over the years in this region. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of them. Woodland Acres, if you're not familiar with Woodland Acres, it's in Rockport. It's a lovely little parcel, and you can hopefully see in this map up here, this is shown in the light green color. So if you remember, that's property that Greenbelt doesn't own, but we have a conservation restriction on this property. It was protected in 2017, finally. It was a former sheep pasture area. It's a total of 47 acres. It's got these beautiful trails, vernal pools, and all kinds of lovely woodland habitat. It's a particularly special and unusual place because a lot of the native pitch pine and other scrub and shrub has regenerated and grown back now that the sheep are gone. It was not taken over by invasives. It's really a successful example of native plant regeneration. So something that from a plant research perspective is quite interesting and valuable. But just from the perspective of the local population, it's a great place to go out and take a walk. And it now has very easy to follow trails and maps. Another special property that I love very much is Climola Reservation. If you haven't been there, that's a great place to go with kids or anyone really, and especially in this super hot weather, nice to be around so much beautiful water. Climola's in Lanesville, actually. There are 3 quarries in this fairly small 18-acre property. You can see it's this area over here. If you could see my cursor there on the map. And it was protected in 2012, and it has connections into Dogtown from that property. So it's a beautiful small property, easy to get around. The trails are wide and fairly level, but you can also really explore and expand your walking into a huge, large area if you wish to do so. And another fairly new acquisition for Greenbelt that I love to mention is the Back Shore property in Gloucester. You can just see from the photograph here, it's a small and special place. There's no parking. So this is a kind of a funny spot. A lot of people walk along the back shore. And so we do have a nice little bench where you can sit and look at the sea, and children can go and play in the tide pools at low tide or lower tide. You can just watch the ocean in all its magnificence. You feel like you're in the middle of a painting or something. It's just a gorgeous place, which has in fact been painted quite a lot. If you wish to, you could park just kind of around the corner. If you can see my cursor here on the map, this property is Greenbelt's Sane Field property here in Gloucester. And Sane Field is also a nice place to go walking. It has an all-access trail, relatively flat and wide and graded, with good parking. And certainly you can park there and walk over to the back shore if you were interested in doing that. But this is an example of it's only half an acre property, but it was protected primarily in partnership with Save Our Shores and local residents who didn't want to see houses or any other kind of development on the ocean side of the road there. And so we're very happy to be able to have this and have it open and accessible to the public. It's kind of unusual in that area. And then just a few key highlights from last year, just to give people a sense of how the year went for Greenbelt, even though it was a COVID year, and like everybody, we had to make a lot of adjustments. We still did manage to protect 340 acres in total of land across the county. We opened 2 new properties to the public. We had almost 3,500 active dues-paying members, and still had a huge number of 240 volunteers. We raised almost $2 million for our operating budget, and separately for our land conservation projects, over $400,000. So in spite of all of the challenges, I think we had a really successful year at Greenbelt last year. And we're just really pleased that we were able to do as much as we were. Most of that success was, of course, because we had so much support from our members, from our supporters in the community. We worked really successfully with many of our municipalities. A lot of the projects we were able to do last year were in partnership with municipalities. And once many of the municipalities figured out how to work remotely, we actually found that there was a lot of efficiency and effectiveness in the municipal partnerships that we have. So that's definitely something that we learned and that we want to continue moving forward. But for Greenbelt, in spite of having to make a lot of adjustments, it was a tremendously productive and exciting year. I think the other big challenge that we learned from, and I'm just going to stop the screen share here because I'm just going to chat a little bit, really was in terms of how important getting outside was for people last year, and I think continues to be this year. Our properties were busier than they have ever been by far. And we had all kinds of challenges as a result of that. People who were used to coming to Greenbelt properties and having them be very empty and quiet were upset because there were so many people there and maybe they couldn't find a place to park. People came walking who weren't experienced at walking in forests or woods or even meadows and fields, and they sometimes got lost, and they would call us and say, "I'm lost. Can you help me find myself?" People sometimes came with inappropriate clothing, and they weren't prepared to walk on the types of trails that we have. And we just saw all kinds of people who desperately wanted to get outside and maybe just didn't have enough experience, and so they weren't adequately prepared. And we tried to help and to adjust and to give people as much information as we could to give them a good experience. And we had people working on weekends and sometimes coming out at night. And it was a crazy time, but it made all of us here at Greenbelt feel so good about our work to realize that what we do makes such a big difference in people's lives. And we've really tried to take that positive feeling and that understanding and move ourselves forward and really emphasize working with people to get them outside. We are very committed to actually trying to expand our work, our conservation work and our engagement work in particular, to more of Essex County, to more of the community, to more people who don't normally get to come outside and walk on a land trust property. We really want to try and make our conservation services and our engagement with people more widely available to more kinds of people. And it does seem to be happening. So that's, for me, maybe one of the biggest lessons learned from last year and something that we really want to carry forward. And the final note I'll just make, and this is, I know it's running a little bit late, but I'll just mention something that I talked about at a previous garden club meeting, which is how much you can learn from nature about if you're interested in what's happening in your own yard with your trees or your soils, if you're seeing things you haven't seen before, if you're struggling to grow things that normally grew well in the past, or you're things like that, you're trying to figure out how to work a little bit with nature. I definitely encourage you to come out into some of Greenbelt's properties with an eye towards looking at the plant material and the soils and the trees and thinking about what you can learn about what's happening in the larger environment around you and how that might be impacting your own space where you're doing gardening. I just think we're seeing so much change now, not just with climate, but certainly that's part of it is a changing climate. And so being able to understand what's happening in nature around you, I think can help your own work and your own interests in your own gardens. And so I would love to take some questions. I know I've run a little bit longer than I planned to, so I apologize if I've taken too much of your afternoon, but I'm certainly happy to continue the conversation and answer any questions that I can. And thank you so much again for having me.
Okay, not at all. You've just made my afternoon. So thank you so much. I didn't realize how vast Greenbelt was.
Well, we are a big organization. We have 15 staff.
I'm going to remove the spotlight right now, and if everybody would go to their view, and you can see everybody in gallery view now. So Kate, I noticed all these Rockport locations where there might be an opportunity to have a guided tour of the Greenbelt property.
Yes, we are. As I mentioned, we're starting to have some in-person walks now. We have, pretty. I would definitely encourage people to keep an eye on our events page on our website, because we're really trying to, keep that updated. We're like everyone else, sort of learning as we're going. How comfortable are people getting together for a guided walk? It's still evolving, but it seems to be evolving very, very quickly now that the state mandates have changed. Even just a week ago, how people felt compared to how they feel now seems different. So I think we're certainly hoping to be able to offer more and more guided in-person walks as the season moves along. And definitely please keep an eye on the website. But specifically in Rockport, yeah, there are some wonderful places to have walks. And if you're interested in a guided walk, as a garden club, we can certainly try to look into. I actually have one of our stewardship staff who is also on the board of the Cape Ann Trail Stewards, and he loves to do walks and tours with folks. He's a huge fan, especially of Woodland Acres. So I think we can, anticipate as we get more and more people together outside, that we could certainly have a walk in Rockport. That would be fun.
Well, that sounds great. And I'm sure, I was thinking maybe the program committee could have like schedule a walk next year or something. Sounds great.
Excellent.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. I grew up in the Briar Neck area around Salt Island, and several, I don't know, a year or so ago, there was an article in the paper or online about Salt Island, and maybe it was just recently, about there being a fence put up there and somehow for goats to graze on poison ivy. And I was just wondering if, I think the Greenbelt was mentioned somewhere in that. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that, or if the Greenbelt has any involvement with that property.
Could I don't interject here?
Yeah.
Does everybody know what Salt Island is? I didn't, but because I'm a newcomer and I didn't realize it was like right off, the Gloucester coast there.
It's privately owned. I read the article in the newspaper, and it's privately owned, and he's just putting goats there, and eventually he's hoping to build a house or something for himself, but there's no building on there right now.
Well, I know there's no building on there right now, and I walked over there at low tide, and there's a sign saying access at your own risk. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, the one thing I can say about goats and poison ivy, they certainly do eat poison ivy, and it doesn't seem to do them any harm. And there are some for hire companies that will hire out their goats to help with invasives, including poison ivy management. It's a lot of work, though. And so far, Greenbelt has not employed goats for invasives management on any of our properties. Just they have to come back a lot. I think in a case like that, where, as I understand it, they're his goats, or they're out there all the time. They're not sort of coming and going. So that maybe makes it a little bit easier. But as I said, at the moment, we're not using goats for invasives management, but I know some people do. And if you want to work with somebody like Goats to Go, or one of those other private companies that rents out goats, I know it is possible. I think it's expensive, but if you don't want to use poison and you don't want to dig it out yourself, because who wants to do that? It is one of the alternatives. I see a bunch of hands up. I'm not sure, Leslie.
I do too. I'm sorry. if you have a question,
Sure, Kate.
there's a button down at the bottom. Well, on a PC screen, there's a thing called reactions down at the bottom of your screen, and there's a possibility for you to raise your hand. And Sherry's next.
I have a question about the ospreys, Kate.
Uh-huh.
Do they migrate south in the winter?
They do, yes. They are amazing birds. They have an incredible life story. They spend the winter down in often Central America, the Caribbean. Many of the osprey from our region end up in the Dominican Republic or Cuba, in those areas. They then fly back here in the spring, and they find their mate again. So they spend all winter as solo birds. They migrate by themselves. They don't migrate as a couple or a family. They just go by themselves. And they spend their winters down there eating and getting strong as solo birds. And then they fly back to this region for the summer, and they nest here, and they come back to the same nest. They find their mate. It happens usually within a couple of days. The male will arrive, or the female, and then a day or two later, here comes the mate. They rebuild or build their nest, lay their eggs, and the female, once she lays eggs, she basically doesn't leave the nest. And the male then does all the fishing for him, for her, and for the chicks until the chicks fledge and leave. And then they all, by themselves, fly off to the south and continue. Osprey can live for a long time, 10 years, 20 years. They typically don't come back. So a young osprey that has fledged and left the nest and flies south for the winter will typically stay in Cuba, say, for example, or wherever it's gone for a full year and a half. So their first season, they don't fly back up here. And then they come back, and the first couple of years that they're back as young, they're not really juveniles, but young adults, they don't mate and they don't lay eggs. They just fly around and watch the other mature grown-ups and learn from them. And then they're once they pair up, usually their second or maybe their third summer back here. And then they typically don't lay eggs their first year. They kind of practice nest building and making a home, just like people. And then they lay eggs usually the summer after that. So part of the reason we put the camera on Annie and Squam there by Lobsterland was Dave had observed them the 2 summers ago. And they were, at that time when he saw them, they were just thank you. They were just beginning or learning. They were learning how to make their nest, and they hadn't laid eggs yet, but he thought, I think next year they're going to be ready. So he put the camera there, and it just happened to be the COVID year. And so we had, as I said, 60,000 hits on the website, people watching all the time. And fortunately, all 3 of their eggs hatched and all 3 of their young fledged. That's kind of rare, honestly. Nature is a little tough, and typically sometimes 1 or more of the eggs will be stolen or destroyed or falls out of the nest. Oftentimes there's predation, especially by owls and sometimes eagles. So it was, we were actually really happy that last year was such a successful year when so many people were watching. So they're really interesting birds. And certainly if you're a bird person, I encourage you to learn more about them.
Thank you.
That's great.
Ed, I think you had your hand up too.
Ed.
Yeah. Kate, you certainly have a monumental name on the road. For those who aren't sailors, Bowditch's monument right off of Misery Island collapsed about 2 years ago, about the same time you arrived. I don't know whether there's a coincidence, but as a hydrologist, you should be interested in getting it resurrected. It was quite a structure. My question is, and it has a little bit to do with a particular property out here, but in Rockport, but in general, are you interested in Greenbelt in joint development where you have somebody who wants to build some housing and there's a fair amount of land but we have a cluster zoning in Rockport, which allows a denser development if half of the land or more is kept open. And I could see where, Greenbelt would end up with some interesting land close into where people are living, be used a lot. And then we would also get some housing, which we need in Rockport, especially lower and moderate income or even market rate, low income, not low income, but lower market rate housing. So it might be an interesting opportunity to work with towns in that area to do that.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, Greenbelt there are quite a few communities around Essex County that have that kind of cluster zoning allowed. So as you said, there's if you had a 20-acre parcel or a 40-acre parcel, and you could develop it under a normal subdivision to build, 15 houses. And but if you agree to cluster them all in one part of the property, maybe you get a bonus and you can build 18 instead on much smaller lots, and then the rest of the land is conserved. Greenbelt has definitely been involved in some projects like that in other communities and has been able to conserve some land. We typically, of course, don't want to spend money on those kinds of projects. We feel that that's appropriate, as if the community has zoned it that way, the developer should not only make a gift of the conserved land because that's part of the permit, but we also request that they make a contribution to our stewardship endowment, because stewarding land in perpetuity is not free. But it is a good way for communities to conserve land. And often what you can do in a situation like that is really evaluate the whole property and find out what part of that property has the highest conservation value for nature, and protect that piece and allow the development to happen on other parts of the land. So it can definitely result in some good outcomes in terms of land conservation. And I would certainly encourage you in Rockport to look at that, and we'd be happy to work with you.
Who would we talk to at Greenbelt about that, given the history of other towns that have done it and stuff?
I would suggest Chris LaPointe, who's our Director of Land Conservation, with the caveat that literally today Chris is having knee surgery, so he won't probably be too responsive for the next week or two. But there's also certainly, anyone in our land conservation department would be able to talk to you, but Chris is probably the right person to start with if there's not something that's time sensitive.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Oh, yeah. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yes, yep.
Okay. First of all, I want to say kudos to you and Greenbelt, and the information that you posted last year as far as specific sites was absolutely wonderful. Like
Good.
the trail is narrow here. You have to cross bridges, so maybe only everybody needs a mask and only a few people, whatever. But I also wanted to plug Greenbelt. If those of you watching aren't involved in Greenbelt, aren't a member yet, it's, as you can see, a great organization, but also you get this great guide that has pull-out waterproof maps. And the larger map that Kate was showing, I'm an ad, here we go. And it's a wonderful guide. You want to go, we all want to be outside more. And it's got the properties, maps, information on it. It's great. And just kudos to Greenbelt.
Well, thank you. And honestly, I did not pay her in advance to say any of that.
This guide is great.
Thank you. That's so nice. I will mention another thing. I should have one here as a prop, but I didn't think of it. We just recently also, in addition to that guide, we published something called the Family Nature Guide, which is really designed for parents with young children or grandparents with young children. So if any of you knows someone who might be interested in that, we have it in English and in Spanish. and it's available on our website. And it's a really neat little guide, and it goes through, I think, 15 of Greenbelt's properties with recommendations for what you could look for, what you might see, what the animals are. It's really just very, very simple. As I said, it's designed, all the walks are pretty short. They're intended for pretty small children. But if you have kids in your life, that's a nice addition to the regular Greenbelt guide that you were just showing.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yes.
Cynthia. Well,
Great.
are there any more questions?
Can't think of. Oh, I do have one more question. Can
Okay.
you talk about is there a relationship between Greenbelt and the trustees? Okay. Greenbelt and the trustees. And in terms of, do you guys work together at all? Talk about that.
Yes. There is a relationship. We consider ourselves partners. So we're separate organizations. We do our own fundraising. We have our own staffs. And but the main biggest difference, I would say, is that the trustees is a statewide organization, a conservation organization. So they have properties and they serve the entire state of Massachusetts. Greenbelt is just for Essex County. So we're considered a regional land trust as opposed to a statewide. And then even within Essex County, there are a number of smaller land trusts that tend to be just serving one community, for example, or the case of the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust. You might know their work. So there are land trusts of all different scales, and we tend to focus on projects that are relatively suited to our scale. So if there's a huge property, tremendously valuable, especially if it has cultural resources like famous old buildings or so on, that's more likely to be a trustees kind of project. Yeah. If it's a more mid-sized property that's very important to our region, but maybe not of statewide importance, that would sort of be more likely to be a Greenbelt project. We have partnered a lot with the trustees on different projects. Sometimes they buy land and we hold a conservation restriction on it, or vice versa. And one really exciting project that we just found out about 3 weeks ago or so, we joined with the trustees and applied together to the National NACA and North Atlantic Wetlands Conservation Act, NACA is what we always call it, North Atlantic Wetlands Conservation Act. And we applied for $1 million, and we received the grant in partnership with the trustees to do marshland restoration work. So both Greenbelt and the trustees own a lot of property in the Great Marsh, a lot of marshland, and that marshland is very threatened by sea level rise and climate change. And so there have been, for the last decade, a number of researchers working in the Great Marsh, trying different restoration techniques to improve the health of the marsh and make it more resilient, and hopefully allow it to grow and accrete so it will be able to keep up with the rising sea levels. And some of the 3 different techniques that have proven most effective at that over these years of research are what we'll be doing on our property in partnership with the trustees over the next 3 years as a result of this $1 million grant that we got. So that's an example of a really terrific partnership between us and the trustees. So yes, we know them well, we work with them a lot, and I think there's room for all different size conservation organizations and conservation projects in this region. So it's nice that we're all here.
Thank you.
Great. Holly?
Thank you very much, Kate. Wonderful. I really appreciated getting to know more about Greenbelt and various properties, and I'm sure there'll be more of us out taking to the trails.
Great.
And joining Greenbelt.
And joining Greenbelt. Oh, thank you, Cynthia. You're my best booster. That's marvelous. Well, I enjoyed, I can't really say meeting you, but seeing you on Zoom and answering a few of your questions. And I look forward to maybe getting getting to meet you actually in person out on the trail or at an event. And certainly do please check out the website. And I'm sorry that the music on the video didn't work, but I'm glad you at least got to see those wonderful osprey last year. And we'll try to put together another video at the end of this year. We'll see how they do this year. They laid 3 eggs again, so.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was pretty good, huh?
Great. Yeah.
I didn't
Thank you.
realize it was so vast. I didn't realize there was that much protected land in our area, you know? And you know what? She said that it was a sheep pasture and there was that beautiful forest that had grown from a sheep pasture.
You're talking about the woodlands?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, all I can think is, oh yeah, it's just going to be all kinds of crap out there, but it was,
Remember that Dogtown was essentially without trees
yeah.
in the late 1800s, so that goes for a lot of it. A lot of us walk up in Woodland Acres quite frequently, so it's probably better in the spring and fall than in the heat of summer. But if anybody
So
wants,
you could lead a program up there.
it's about a
Laura,
3.5
Hallowell
mile
Rock.
walk, about 3.5 miles.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, it depends on where you start too. If you start at the rail trail down at the pit, you walk up the rail trail a while, and then there are 2 connections over the woodlands too, which even give you expand it and give you some really beautiful territory.
Oh yeah, that sounds good. Well,
Thank you, everybody.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Sorry I was late. Better late than never.
I will end the meeting, you know, when you guys all
Went, huh?
Bye, you
I'll say
guys.
good-
Nice
I'll
seeing
say
everybody.
goodbye and end the meeting in 3, 2, 1. Bye.